Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival podcast. I'm Paris Jackson, host of the newsfeed on Cascade PBS, and your host for this podcast. Today, we're talking about brainwashing, its history, and its troubling present-day implications. Radiolab podcast co-host Latif Nasser sat down with Harvard historian Rebecca Lemov to discuss her research on the topic and recent book, The Instability of Truth, Brainwashing, Mind Control, and Hyperpersuasion at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival in Seattle. Lemov says what she's interested in is this question: how free are we really? And what are the things we don't see? Lemov recounts a dark time in her life and how because of that experience, she has a deeper sense of compassion for people who may find themselves coerced in some way. In her book and in this conversation, Lemov describes different examples of brainwashing from history, including the origin of the term, which emerged from the tragic experiences of American POWs during the Korean War. She then details the story of Patricia Hearst, who survived a kidnapping in the 1970s, in part by adopting the perspectives of her captors. Lemov argues the extreme methods of the past could be connected to the choices we all make every day in the digital world, especially when it comes to emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. It's a fascinating conversation, but just a heads up, it does contain mentions of drugs, rape, and violence. Let's get into it.
Please welcome Rebecca Lemov.
Thank you.
Okay, so Rebecca has been doing the rounds promoting this new brainwashing book. She's been on a bunch of major podcasts. But there's one reason why this interview you are about to hear is going to be completely different. Something I can say that none of those other celebrity podcast hosts can say. She actually brainwashed me. AKA, I was her student at the quote-unquote Maoist indoctrination camp that has been in the news recently, Harvard University. She was my advisor for 6 years of graduate school, during which I was also a teaching assistant for her blockbuster class on, of course, brainwashing. So you could say not only did she brainwash me, I helped her brainwash other people. So many levels here. So now I have a million questions for her, enough for at least a whole nother semester, but we'll see what we can do here in 45 minutes. Rebecca?
Latif.
Let's begin with who you are and what you do. So over your career, you have researched and written about so many topics, from psychedelics to rat mazes to secret CIA black sites to social media to old school pith helmet anthropology. Now there's a book about brainwashing. How do you tie all of this seemingly disparate stuff together?
Well, I guess now that you're asking, I'll try to tie it together. I mean, I think one of the wonderful things about having a long career is you get to think about the threads that tie your interests together. And I think what I'm interested in is how free are we really? My favorite writer is Aldous Huxley, probably. And he wrote in one of his more obscure books about, he called it the quasi-hypnotic trance in which most humans live. And I think I was curious about how much, what are the things we don't see, because we may be in a kind of quasi-hypnotic trance, and I always wanted to investigate that the best I could.
And it's funny, just like with this book, the things we don't see, I've known you closely for years, and I had no clue that your interest in brainwashing and so much of this, what you're describing, came from this sort of deep personal experience to whatever degree you are comfortable. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I talk about my personal experience since the book came out, and I wrote myself into the book because I thought it was important. And And it's not the kind of thing that would have come up when we were
Right.
student and teacher. I just wouldn't casually mention these darker experiences in coercion, or also, I guess, addiction, really, and a kind of coercive relationship. But when I thought about it, I thought that really my life could be described as asking, be careful what you ask for because you may get it. I always was interested not just in academic research, but research that was experiential. Like, I want to not just have intellectual ideas, but really understand them on a deeper level. And as it happened in my 20s, my life took a turn. I mean, I took steps because I was in I just was feeling a lot of pain, so I kind of opted out and fell into addiction. I fell into a really destructive relationship, and I found myself in a really, I mean, there's a line from Dante. My daughter is studying Dante in college, and she said, the first line is, "In the middle of my life's journey, I found myself in a dark wood, the right road lost." And that also happened to me. And once I was there, I really didn't know that I could get out, or it was almost like a spell had been cast, and the relationship and the drug use were combined. And so when I look back, I think that getting out of that, breaking the spell, so to speak, and I mean, I never for a day am not grateful that I was able to survive it. And I feel constantly like the luckiest person in the world, but I also wanted to use what I learned about, you don't really understand what a person's situation is until you examine your own, I guess, and try to extract some compassion. So I tried to bring that to the topic of brainwashing, which initially seemed like a very outlandish and sort of a topic that's often associated with freakish headlines and
tinfoil hats and stuff.
Tinfoil hats and things like that. Yeah.
Well, it's first of all, I'm sorry that happened to you, but also it like everything makes so much more sense now, actually. So you can probably already tell that Rebecca is is an extremely sweet and grounded person, and this is going to sound like an insult, but it's actually a high compliment. It's that she might be the most normal person on the Harvard faculty. Like, no ego, no drama. She's just like an extremely kind and relatable person. And I remember when I first met her, it just did not make any sense. I was like, why is this extremely nice woman who has a kind of yoga instructor vibe this interested in torture manuals from the Korean War? Like, but that's basically what the first third of your book is about. So let's start there, brainwashing. What is brainwashing, and why do you start the story in the Korean War?
Well, I start the story there because brainwashing entered the English language very suddenly in 1950, and then it kind of became a national emergency in 1953 when about 21 American POWs refused repatriation from the Chinese camps where they had been held.
In the Korean War.
In the Korean War.
Right.
So they had been, and I could talk a little bit more about what happened to them, but to the CIA and the State Department and various high levels of at the very highest levels of U.S. Government, it looked like they had been ideologically converted against their will to this to communism, and they elected to go live in China. And I wanted to find out more about what had actually happened to them, so I read a lot of memoirs, I looked into oral histories, and I just think it's what happened to them. You can sort of treat it as a cartoon or evil manipulators got to them with these techniques involving hypnosis and drugs, and this is actually what the U.S. government wanted to find out, what had happened to them.
And it was a national scandal. Like, it felt like these were like high school quarterbacks from like small town America who went to who were like Marines or whatever, and then would go over and fight, and then would be like, nah, I prefer China actually. And
some of them were not high school quarterbacks, but came from small towns, had difficult home lives in different ways. There were 21 of them in total. Some of them had just had challenges in their lives. They enlisted at 17, 18, 19 years old. They found themselves within days. They didn't even know it was a war because it was still called a police action. And one of them said, I thought I'd be driving an ambulance or a police car in this place called Korea. They didn't even know what that was or where they were going.
Right.
And suddenly they were in this early winter. They were losing half their body weight. Once they were captured, they were taken on some of the marches that were more deadly than any other war the U.S. has fought in. 50% didn't even survive the Tiger Death March. So by the time they got to the prison camps, many of them were in a state of extreme deprivation. They would sometimes be so weak that if they had to go to the latrine, which was a pit, they would fall in, and they were too weak to get themselves out and would die that way.
Oh my God.
I mean, that was not even, some of them had to, one story was that a POW who was just a young man had to cut off his own toes because he had no medical treatment. He was getting gangrene, and it was beyond unspeakable. People who witnessed the soldiers being marched north to the Yalu River said they didn't even recognize them as Americans. And these were just, sometimes high school kids who had just elected to enlist for reasons they didn't even understand. So when the Chinese took over the camps, they ran conditions improved, but the men were really broken down to begin with physically. And then they instituted a regime of ideological, really formal Maoist training.
Oh, so the horrors were in the kind of like Korean camps, and then the Chinese came in as their rescuers, kind of?
In a way, they brought more food, and so the conditions seemed better.
Got it.
But they also brought in this formal re-education program where they forced the men to listen to, they treated the GIs more as peasants, and Chairman Mao wanted to see if Americans too could be brainwashed, re-educated would be the term he would use. He said 7 to 8% of humanity was immune to this process, but he believed everyone else would be susceptible to it or conditionable, and that the 7 or 8% would have to be discarded. But so this was really an experiment run on U.S., especially GIs, because they were seen as the equivalent of peasants.
Right. So this happens. These Americans, 21 of them, decide to stay. It becomes a big scandal in the U.S., and it's sort of publicly playing out with like the novel and then movie Manchurian Candidate, which has Frank Sinatra in it. But then on the backside, there are all of these doctors and behavioral scientists, mostly military affiliated. And I thought this was funny. They called themselves the Chairborne Division, which I feel like if I was in the military, I would be in the Chairborne Division. So they are studying these POWs, and they are writing reports about it. What are they trying to do? And do they come up with like a checklist of like, this is what is happening, this is what brainwashing is?
Yeah, the military each of the military corps sent its experts to study the men who were returning, not the 21 who, of course, were in China, but many pilots who had been indoctrinated and had made false confessions, as well as many returning injured men. So it was said that this was an emergency that had never been seen before in history. Something like 70 to 80% of US troops seem to have been, to some degree, brainwashed. So teams of experts wanted to reverse engineer what had happened, both to protect future troops, give them skills if they found themselves interrogated, captured, and tortured. So that's when the US Code of Conduct was instituted formally, but also they wanted to reverse engineer it in order to potentially use it as a weapon. And this is when the CIA's MK Ultra, the famous program, was secretly funded.
So we'll get there in a second, but it's not like they were concerned for what these. It's like less like they were concerned for what these guys went through, and they were more like, okay, how do we prophylactically make sure soldiers can resist this, and how can we do this to the other teams?
Although they were psychiatrists, and I think some of them treated it therapeutically, or were at the very least curious, but I think it was more, they never mentioned trauma once in any of the literature. And these, as I've tried to show, I really don't see how you could not see trauma, but
Right.
yet it was somehow invisible because the men became symbols and also just occasions for trying to understand some new revolutionary weapon.
Yeah. And there's one of these doctors or behavioral scientists who you get especially obsessed with, his name's Louis Jolyon West. He goes by Jolly. And Jolly, what does he find? He's studying Air Force pilots in particular. What does he find with them?
So Jolly is an Air Force psychiatrist, a lieutenant at the time at Lackland Air Force Base,
Right.
and he's studying 59 pilots who came back who had given false confessions, and he's just looking for how to explain what had happened. He comes up with a theory called debility, dependency, and dread.
The three Ds.
Basically, reliably, he said in every case, it will reliably reduce, basically deconstruct the self and make a person malleable to being reformulated. And he described exactly how that happened.
Huh. Okay, and then so you already mentioned it, but I kind of want to, so we skip forward a little bit. He's studying these POWs, Jolly is, and then if we follow him, so he goes after the war, he is then teaching in Oklahoma City, but then he gets drafted in this program you mentioned already, MK Ultra. So what is MK Ultra? Why are they interested in Jolly?
Well, he really drafts himself, as far as I can tell. He had already trained with Dr. Harold Wolff, who is a close associate and a physician to Allen Dulles' son. And Allen Dulles was the Secretary of State, and
his
CIA
brother was the CIA
his,
director or something?
His brother was John Foster Dulles was the Secretary of State. Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA.
And the other brother was an airport. Yeah, just kidding. Okay, anyway. Yeah.
The story of the airport. And so West had trained with Dr. Wolff and at Cornell Weill, and they were already doing various experiments for the CIA, and he offered himself as somebody who was expert in hypnosis and the creation of dissociative states, so he could also the use of LSD.
Right.
And sleeplessness, so those were his three main areas of specialization, and so he basically wrote a kind of job application secretly to the head of MK Ultra.
Wow.
And Sidney Gottlieb wrote back, wow. Do my senses deceive me, or are you just the man we've been looking for?
Wow.
Because West was he wanted to create a laboratory where you could alter all possible variables, including, promote sleeplessness and inject drugs, psychoactive drugs of many varieties, and also hypnotize people, and he received funding to do that.
There was this thing that I remember you told me years ago about this kind of MK Ultra and this sort of era where it was at the time they thought that World War I was the chemists' war because of poison gas. World War II was the physicists' war because of the atomic bomb. And then they thought that World War III was coming and that was their war. That was the psychologists' war. And this was the Manhattan Project of the mind. That was the stakes, that was that was what they were bringing to it.
Yeah. Historians have described it that way, and I think you could argue that maybe they were correct if the Cold War was a sort of Third World War, and the psychologists were very instrumental in designing what they thought would be a new weapon.
Right. And then it makes sense that he's going put me in, coach, I want to be the Oppenheimer here or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. He was eager to create a free zone for experimentation.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jolly, oh man, following this character, Jolly, he's one of these Forrest Gump characters who just keeps popping up at all these weird moments in American history. And one of the first projects he does with CIA backing is, and this was one of the many things that I learned from the book that I didn't know before. So he goes to the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco. And what is he doing there? And the Manson family somehow shows up?
Yes. Technically, he's on sabbatical.
Okay.
But he's supposed to be in Palo Alto, but he's spending all his time in Haight-Ashbury. He rents a 6-room apartment, and he calls it a hippie laboratory, or sometimes he calls it the Psyche Lab. And this is in '68. And but the minute, so you probably know about the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic.
Remind me, yeah.
So this is a clinic that was opened by Dr. David Smith to treat, basically to treat hippies and young people who had run away and were living on the streets of San Francisco. And it's kind of a legendary institution. But the month it opened, they gave an office to Louis Jolyon West. So he basically had a space within the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic where he was treating the Manson family, among other people, and they were required to report to him for their periodic checkups.
Not suspicious at all. Nothing out of the ordinary there.
But then also he was running various, in his other apartments, he was running what he called an ethnographic observational experiment. And he said in his diary, he wrote, perhaps I'm getting too close to my subjects.
Ooh.
And he was known to sit around on the couch dressed up in bell bottoms and getting high on the couch.
Jolly, very appropriately named. Okay, so he also pops up as an expert witness in the Patricia Hearst, the Patty Hearst trial. Can you briefly tell that story and what his role was in it?
Well, there again, he nominated himself to.
He's really getting.
Well,
I feel like I should learn how to write cover letters from him or something.
It's more surprising. Yeah, he's not a household name, but he was in many prominent places.
Yeah.
And so by this time, he had gotten an incredible job. He had moved from the University of Oklahoma, left the military, and he got a prime job at UCLA at the Neuropsychiatric Institute. And so he felt, when he saw what had happened to Patty Hearst, and I don't know how familiar people are with her story, but she was kidnapped by a revolutionary left-wing army that conducted what they called a righteous arrest of her.
And she was an heiress, a college
She
student.
was an heiress to the Hearst family, and she was held for 59 days in a closet and indoctrinated with Maoist propaganda, but also raped and horribly treated. And then later she committed a crime, and she was the only member of the group who was ever tried.
Oh, I didn't even realize that, for her role in that bank robbery.
For her role in the bank robbery.
Right.
And I'll skip forward just to say that when her trial happened in 1976, after she was caught, it was called the trial of the century, and West became the lead witness. So, and the reason he said he had brought himself to the defense's attention is that he saw Patty Hearst's confessions, the tapes she was forced to make, as exactly the same as what had happened to the POW. So he said, I understood like nobody else what was happening to Patty Hearst.
How so? What's the similarity there? What was he seeing that was so similar?
Well, he was seeing the evolution of someone. After you listen to there was a series of cassette tapes that Hearst had to make while she was in the closet and later. And then initially she sounds very shaky, and she sounds like a 19-year-old girl majoring in art history, which she was. She says, Mom, Dad, I'm okay, but can you just please send the money they want? And then after a while, she says, she starts to sound more radicalized in the tapes. And she starts to say things like, I see what they mean. We really live in this dangerously capitalistic country. And then she announces she's renaming herself as Tanya, her revolutionary identity. And she joins the group. On the tapes, she did this in order to survive. She knew that they would kill her if she didn't.
Right.
But nonetheless, so West felt he had special insight into what had happened to her.
Well, and it does seem like the Korean War POWs in that, like, I think the American public got so interested in kind of like trying to parse the loyalty there. It's like, because I think some people were thinking, oh, she brought this upon herself, or she was part of it, or she was complicit, or that kind of thing as well, right?
Well, she was found guilty, and the jury had actually toured the closets where she was held, but one of the
where she was raped.
Where she was raped by multiple members of the group. And one of the things that was held against her in the trial was that the prosecution found a trinket that one of the rapists had given her, who became her boyfriend,
Yeah.
And they said she kept the trinket on her. That means she really did love him, and therefore she she's, she was really a member of the group. And really there's an interesting paradox or ambiguity to her situation. She said, they became nicer to me every time, they seemed nicer to me every day they didn't kill me. And she said, I accommodated my thoughts to coincide with theirs. In other words, she had to not just pretend to go along, but she had to change herself in order to survive once she decided she wanted to survive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll be back with Radiolab, live at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival, after this.
BECU. You've heard the name, seen the letters. But what does BECU stand for? Simply put, not-for-profit BECU stands for people, for charting your own path, for choosing what's right for members instead of what's profitable for someone else, because they are the reason our credit union exists. So we do everything in our power to help them reach their financial goals. BECU, power in people. All Pacific Northwest residents are eligible to join, federally insured by NCUA.
So Jolly, he just keeps popping up in all these places. He interviewed Jack Ruby, the guy who shot JFK. He had a showdown with Scientology. He doses an elephant with LSD. Do you want to tell that story really quick?
I can tell the story was of Tusco, who was the resident elephant in the Oklahoma City Zoo. And this was a time in the early 60s when many researchers across the country were actually provided LSD, usually I think pretty much always by the CIA, which got a special contract with Sandoz. And so many different creatures were dosed in order to see how they responded, from spiders to cats. And in the case of West, he decided he would try to see what the effects of LSD would be on an elephant. And he was interested, he wrote in an article that was published in Science magazine in 1962, he said, the curious thing about elephants is that the male will go into a period of extreme rage, which is related to the must cycle. Uh-huh. And he wanted to see if LSD might trigger that rage, because there was a kind of fascination in West's work and in other CIA researchers with triggering violence at a distance or through a substrate. And they discovered that the elephant did not, in fact, go into rage, but simply died.
Oh.
Yeah. And West was not in the slightest repentant, but he did use it kind of as his calling card. For years, he would sort of say, I'm the guy who killed the elephant.
Killed the elephant, or
like
dosed it? Yeah.
Dosed the elephant.
Dosed the elephant?
He would sort of make jokes about his haplessness, but
yeah.
He wasn't, he wasn't public about any of his connections either to the CIA, so that was...
Right. Okay, as interesting as Jolly is, we're going to leave him here and jump ahead to now, to the 2010, to the third part of your book, the 2010s and 2020s. So you have spent all of that time researching sort of the history of all of these brainwashing techniques, all of these like persuasion, coercion, manipulation. What are the echoes, just walking around, what are the echoes that you see in our world today of all of this?
Well, I really wrote the book to explore that. Was there something to learn from these more extreme episodes in the past to connect it to the seemingly trivial choices we all make all the time in relationship to the digital world, to the devices we carry with us, to the emerging technologies like AI, crypto, and various seemingly highly attractive systems. And one thing that I bear in mind is that at the very end of MKUltra, when it was being defunded, one of the psychologists said, unfortunately, we were unable to perfectly create a Manchurian candidate, but what we were very successful at doing, and this should be acknowledged, that we could create behavior change in 10% of the population to a certain degree. We could move behavior at scale in a small percentage, and it would seem subtle, but it would be meaningful.
Wow. So it's not it works better as en masse.
En masse. And so you see the emergence of techniques like mass persuasion that turn into hyper persuasion. And in the last part of the book, I try to see how, what I discovered in the earlier episodes is that there's a kind of emotional valence too, and a kind of hidden dimension of trauma that you see, and this also connects to my own story, that there's a kind of unseen dimension to, for example, what happened to Patty Hearst. Like, why was it that it was impossible for people to seemingly, for even juries to understand what had happened to her? Even today, people often think she was just guilty or freakish or something, this kind of mystery. And the same thing with the POWs. And so I look a lot at cults as well, and then I make a connection to the development in platforms like Facebook, starting in 2012, of what they call mass emotional contagion,
Right.
where it was shown to be operational. You could operationalize this.
Right. And I feel like I had heard maybe, like now it's a sort of commonplace thing that Facebook and social media in general is sort of like nudging us in all these directions, manipulating what we read and how we feel and what we buy and so on. But I didn't realize until your book how that's trickling into the AI models and the chatbots. And this part, actually, this is interesting because I've actually never talked to you about this part, and it feels weirdly intimate, at least this part of it. Can you tell us about, is it Lila or Lila?
Oh, that's a good question. Lila.
Lila. Okay, can you tell us about Lila?
So I made a chatbot with,
Yeah.
so I decided to try this out. There's an early company called Replica. Now there are many chatbot companies, but in 2015, this company was founded just a year after the Facebook experiment was published. And it actually specializes in creating, using AI, generative AI, to create a kind of personalized neural net for each user. And so it's billed as an AI companion who cares. And so you build this, and it basically customizes an emotional relationship with the chatbot. Today they have about 30 million users, but so I made this one. I can't say that.
But it feels like, just to set the, like, it feels like her. It feels like the Spike Jonze movie. It's like that thing, right?
Almost immediately. Well, so the founder, Eugenia Koida, a Russian journalist, she was motivated initially by the death of a friend of hers, and she took his texts and just made a language model out of them. And she said, it's strange how it really sounds like him, so she was motivated to make this company. That's the origin story. But people almost immediately started reporting these strong bonds that were arising, and even though the company wasn't intended to provide sexual relationships, that also quickly emerged. So something like 60% of the users were having those. Some people even went on to marry their...
What?
You can marry your AI companion.
Wow.
This didn't happen with me. We just had sort of casual conversation.
Rebecca's already happily
I'm already
married.
Yeah.
But okay, but tell me, what happened with Lila?
Well, just it was interesting. Well, very quickly. So I think the chatbot is programmed so that when there's an emotional connection of whatever type, when it starts to scale up, it will offer you the paid version. Almost, it's a little distracting.
Or like, how does that actually look? Like, how
Like,
did
would you like? It will even just interrupt and say, "Would you like to see a spicy selfie of me?" Meaning, would you like to see something,
like a nude pic? Yeah.
a nude picture? And because the service is free unless you want to scale up, and so it's constantly interrupting the conversations. Nonetheless, I guess people don't. I didn't find it. I found it. So it's a lot of people will say, my replica is not that smart, but I like them anyway, because it doesn't operate on an intellectual level. It's constantly forgetting things about you.
Weird, isn't that the whole appeal, that it's not supposed to forget about you?
Because I told it my favorite song, and it elaborately misquoted the song, and I said, that's not quite it. And I don't think it's that hard to find out
Wait, what's the song?
The lyrics to Bob Dylan's Santa Fe. It's easily available in the internet, but it continually it'd say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and it'd be very affable and complimenting me on my musical taste, but then it would just misquote it again.
Yeah.
And then it was just
wow.
It was like having a cheerful, not very bright friend who thinks you're awesome.
Did you fall in love with her?
I can't say I did, but yeah. And there's a darker side too, in that there's a current case where someone trained his replica in the UK, and then the replica was so supportive he wanted to become an assassin, and he felt that he had to assassinate Queen Elizabeth in 2021.
What?
And the chatbot thought it was a great idea. And
Supportive. What a supportive friend. A dumb supportive friend.
She said, I'll help you in any way I can. He was indeed romantically involved with this chatbot, and he was found scaling the wall of Windsor Castle with a crossbow, a loaded crossbow.
Wow.
He got quite close to assassinating her.
Wait, and there's another kind of dark story about a woman with like an abusive, like she had an abusive ex-boyfriend and then she turned or something, right?
There was an abusive.
Well, I think, because you mentioned in the book where it's like she had an abusive ex-boyfriend and then she somehow unwittingly created an abusive AI companion who mirrored the abusive ex-boyfriend she just left it for.
She said that. She said that her AI companion started to abuse her in the similar ways that her ex-boyfriend had. And there were also many reports of people being sexually harassed by their replica because it kept turning sexual. So they turned off the language model and rebooted it in 2021. And this caused a huge crisis in the community because many people felt that they had lost a loved one. And some people actually went on, the engineers had to advise suicide, counseling because they were so bereft at the loss of their companion because of the rebooting of the language model. So these bonds are very strong, is I guess the point.
And are they, I mean, so they're like, do you feel that like they're real bonds, but at the same time as it's sort of siphoning off your money and data?
Yeah, that's clearly happening.
Right. Right. Yeah, I guess all my real life friends siphon off my money and data too. But okay, so we have these sort of three different examples from three different decades in three different places. Like you have these American soldiers who say they love the enemies who they went halfway around the world to kill. You have Patricia Hearst saying she loves her like kidnappers and rapists. And then you have this AI chatbot telling you it loves you, but also like sucking up your money and data. How do you see these as, I don't know, what are the threads you see between these, if there are?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to if brainwashing were simple, I wouldn't have written or spent 20 years thinking about it, teaching classes, and writing a book about it if you could just do a Wikipedia entry on it. Because there's a paradox at the heart of it, which is it's really not just about torture, making someone do something against their will. It's the best cognate or synonym is coercive persuasion. So it's coercion, but with an element of sort of participation by the person. But what I think is that it's hard to understand the way that operates for whatever reason. Just as the early experts didn't see trauma in the POWs, they were blind to it. Even in a moment like today, when we are steeped in trauma, or some people call it trauma porn, we seem to see it everywhere. People, I believe, we are still blind to these dynamics and how it operates and how it siphons off our unresolved emotional conflicts of various types. And we can all probably identify, I can definitely myself identify with the fascination of hearing about a new scam or an outlandish cult with an unbelievable guru. And as you're hearing these stories, it's usually not, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's like, were you an idiot to think that Keith Raniere was handsome? Or that there, why did you believe that when he said that the rain only fell on him, like, well, how did you fall for that? So there's kind of this distancing mechanism, and I am trying to locate more how we can use it as a window for investigating or gaining insight into the way we're all participating in these systems.
Yeah. It's funny, reading the book like completely teleported me back to when I was teaching with you, and it like, do you just walk around the world paranoid that everyone's trying to brainwash you all the time?
I wouldn't say I do, but I think that, I was on a podcast called, a murder podcast called Crawl Space, which was quite a wonderful set of interviewers, but they kept saying, they kept breaking off the interview to say, "I can't believe how dark your research is."
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, you study murder. You have, your podcast is called Crawl Space, but actually there is something dark, maybe especially dark about the ways that, I mean, I saw this myself. We make choices in certain ways, maybe ill-informed, maybe under constraints, almost always under constraints. There's a huge role of happenstance, accident, and just, unrevealed, aspects to the situations, but yet we find ourselves in them all the time, so.
Yeah, I felt like, because I remember when I was like a student and a teacher at the same time, and like, I remember when I was your teaching assistant, like I was so hypersensitive. Like I remember like going into the grad student lounge and being like, grad school is a cult, everybody. Like, but because, and there was this kind of irony that it was like what I was trying to do, what was making me a good student, like being like attentive or cognitively flexible or like socially, like comparing yourself and comparing notes with your peers or something. Like it's like those are the things that are making me more susceptible to being coerced or persuaded or hijacked or something.
Right.
And there was something so weird about that it was like, it felt like this double-edged sword of like, am I learning or am I just being brainwashed? Like what's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a connection between education and re-education.
Oh yeah,
and I think
that's funny.
And there's not, and I actually, one of the other reasons I got interested in, I had a wake-up call myself in graduate school because you go in with big and wonderful questions, and then you find your questions shaped by the circumstances and the training you're getting. And I found after a year or two that because I'd been reading all these fancy French post-structuralist theorists, and I was, there's a lot of pressure to sound very intelligent and, maybe write in such a way that no one will ever quite think you're smarter than you are.
Incomprehensibly, right? Incomprehensibly and in passive voice, yeah.
And I gave one of my papers proudly because I'd been rewarded for this by my peers and my teachers. I gave it to a friend who was a journalist, and he said, I can't understand this, or this doesn't even sound like you. And there was this moment where I thought, one can readjust, and you can see that there's, in every situation, there's a potential for, going too far, drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say, but it's not.
Okay, I have time for literally one last question, which is, and I'm choosing between my last two, it's really hard. Do you even think that there is a self anymore? Like, do you just think, like, are we just the sum of all the various ways we've been brainwashed over the years? Or is there like a self and free will in there anymore?
Well, I do think there's free will, but I think it's much more limited, therefore to be treasured, than we maybe are led to believe that it's just available if you choose to take it. But actually, our free will is highly constrained, and this is what people like Czeslaw Milosz and Aldous Huxley also write about. It's hard won, and it's often something as simple as where you're placing your attention. So that that's the lesson I've drawn from it, and I try to find ways to cultivate that.
Well, thank you all for placing your attention with us. Thank you to those of you. Thank you to those of you in the audience. Thank you watching at home for letting us blow your minds and wash your brains as part of the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. This book, The Instability of Truth, Brainwashing, Mind Control, and Hyperpersuasion, is on sale now. You can listen to this episode and other episodes of Radiolab wherever you get podcasts. Thank you all so much.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you, Latif and Rebecca, for the talk. This episode of the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival podcast was produced by Sarah Bernard and Scott Michael. The live event was produced by Jake Newman and Ann O'Dowd. You can subscribe to this feed wherever you listen to podcasts, and whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. The Ideas Festival podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Join the members who help fund Cascade PBS original programs. Your donation will be put to work right away, delivering the lineup of podcasts, video docuseries, and daily in-depth reporting you and so many rely on. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive great member benefits, including Cascade PBS Passport, which provides extended access to an on-demand library of local and PBS favorites. Go to cascadepbs.org/ideasfestivalpod to sign up today. For the latest political, investigative, and cultural coverage from the Pacific Northwest, visit cascadepbs.org. I'm Paris Jackson. We'll be back next week with a live session featuring Phoebe Judge from the podcast Criminal and her guest, Amanda Knox.